Hi everyone, my name is Yossi Rachman. As Gil mentioned, I'm the Director of Security Research for Semperis. I've got two ginger kids, a ginger husky who thinks he's a 40-year-old man because he likes fishing, and one very judgmental ginger cat who could use a diet. Anybody ever heard about the SolarWinds attack from 2020? Quick show of hands. Awesome. All right, cool. So the SolarWinds attack was actually one of the most impactful and damaging supply chain attack, at least in the last couple of years. I'm not gonna talk about it. I'm gonna show you other people talking about it, and then we'll dive into the whole AI thing.
A new warning tonight about the scope of a massive cyber attack.
Already believed to be the largest cyber attack on our government.
America under virtual invasion. That's what Senator Dick Durbin is calling a massive Russian cyber attack on U.S. government agencies.
Preliminary indications suggest that the scope and scale of this incident are beyond any that we've confronted as a nation, and its implications are significant.
The U.S. has accused the Russian intelligence service of orchestrating the attack. They say it resembles the techniques used against Ukraine in 2017. But Russia denies any involvement in the SolarWinds hack. The attacks are continuing to this day as government agencies try to secure their systems. The hack has demonstrated how vulnerable governments are to this type of cybersecurity breach.
And the last one.
When we analyzed everything that we saw at Microsoft, we asked ourselves, how many engineers had probably worked on these attacks? And the answer we came to was, well, certainly more than 1,000.
So the speaker that was here before me talked about geopolitical conflicts and how cybersecurity aligns with real politics and other geopolitical issues. But the 2020 SolarWinds attack was actually one of the blatant examples of it. Basically, the Russian Federation, now we know that it was the Russian Federation, worked for a number of years to gain access into critical systems of a number of organizations, business organizations and government organizations, in order to try and cause as much harm as possible. We'll see a short breakdown of the actual attack, how it happened, when it started, what was the repercussion. But first of all, we'll start with who exactly found that ticking time bomb waiting to explode. So December 2020, a company called FIRA, anybody's familiar with it here in the crowd? All right, they're considered today as the top-notch incident response professionals in the world globally. They were acquired by Google a while ago, but they're the ones who actually found it. What they saw was actually a mobile device trying to register into a specific network environment through an MFA challenge, a multi-factor authentication challenge. And when they started looking at the actual technical details, they understood that this specific device isn't supposed to do it. Nobody knew whose device was it. Nobody knew why it happened to ping from an unknown location. And then they started to see the same behavior happening all across other organizations, all leading to one specific solution, software solution, the SolarWinds platform, basically, the Orion IT monitoring platform. It's a platform that utilizes an agent that runs locally as a system admin, basically, so the highest privileges possible. Imagine exactly what an attacker compromising that system is able to do to any organization. And When they continued to investigate, they saw that the culprit was actually a malicious DLL file that was signed by the vendor, by SolarWinds themselves. Meaning somehow somebody was able to either fake a legitimate DLL file, a legitimate file that's part of that platform, or even worse, gain access to internal mechanisms within the software development and software shipment processes of SolarWinds. And lo and behold, that was actually due to an FTP server where all of the updates resides, and the password for that FTP server was extremely easily guessable. The outcome was that more than 18,000 businesses were impacted by this attack, including Microsoft. At that point, Microsoft was brought in, the investigation continued, and the federal agency of CISA, together with Microsoft, SolarWinds, and FireEye, they released an emergency statement saying, if you have the SolarWinds platform, disconnect it from everything. Shut it down, remove it, disable it, don't use it, and make sure that nothing else communicates with it inside your organization. Imagine for a software vendor, that's like the worst case scenario, okay? A federal agency issuing an emergency notice saying stop using it immediately. Now, out of that, that's the actual notice that was issued. Again, you can see it's a federal emergency notice. Eventually, following additional investigation activities, it was found out that the Russians were behind this attack, and they've been at it since at least October 2019. And again, this ticking time bomb was actually discovered in December 2020. So imagine the level of damage that that threat actor could have done or was able to do. All right, so there was a Russian cybersecurity attack. That's fine. And by the way, in terms of the impact, those are the different organizations. It's a very short list of the different organizations, business organizations that were hit, but federal organizations as well. So government agencies like the US Department of Defense, the US Department of Homeland Security, and so on. Out of that came an executive order forcing almost any organization today working with the federal government and private organizations to utilize something that's called a software bill of material, meaning you should have a ready-made list of each and every software component you're incorporating into your solution. Why? Because the next time something like that happens, you'll be able, within seconds, preferably, to tell whether or not you're one of the compromised organizations. All right, so that's fine and pretty interesting, but what does all this have to do with that? You guys recognize it, right? That's the right generation in the audience, because I've been giving this talk for like 25-year-olds. Nobody knows who this guy is. All right, so about 2 years ago, ChatGPT exploded into our lives, right? Anybody here hasn't heard about ChatGPT and generative AI? Awesome. One software developer submitted a question on Stack Overflow, naively asking, is it better than Stack Overflow, and does this mean the end of software developers? Well, the comments came in pretty fast. Most of them were less than positive, as you can probably see by the rating of the question. But, you know, it's not for me to say, but haters gonna hate, right? That's actually for the 25-year-olds who didn't recognize T800. So ChatGPT did impact Stack Overflow, and it does impact software development and software developers, and it does impact the tech industry in general. but it doesn't make the technical people obsolete. It empowers them, just like Mickey said, our CEO. That's a force multiplier, but still the question remains, what does this has to do with that? What does ChatGPT, generative AI, artificial intelligence has to do with the SolarWinds attack? So in order to answer that, I'm going to touch something a little bit, I'm going to do kind of a sidetrack before we answer the questions. Do androids dream of electric sheep? Anybody gets the reference? All right, I'm starting to like this audience. So 2017, Blade Runner 2049 is a movie that was just released. That movie is actually a sequel to the 1982 movie, Blade Runner, with Harrison Ford, which was a masterpiece. And that's actually a depiction of a 1968 book by the name Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, by Philip K. Dick, by the way. The whole thing has to do, both movies and the book has to do with something that we today call AI hallucinations, but the theme itself is psychology of artificial intelligence. If you've seen the movies, if you've read the book, you know what I'm talking about. And this notion was deep sci-fi notion back when the movies came out, at least when the 1982 movie came out, and for sure when the book was written and released. So today we have artificial intelligence that has psychological issues, and those issues exhibit themselves in AI hallucinations. Who here has heard about this term of AI hallucinations? Awesome. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples. Just for those of you who are less familiar with this subject. But before that, I want to describe the two competing philosophies or approaches for AI hallucinations. On one end, we've got Google. Now, Google is a technological organization. It's filled with engineers and people who have a real analytical view of the type of technologies that they're creating. And when they describe their views on AI hallucinations, they utilize the same analytical approach. For them, it's a math problem. If you punch in the wrong numbers, or if the equation is built in if there's some error in the equation, then the outcome is bad. The outcome is wrong. Okay, you punch in numbers on one end, the formula is wrong, and then you get a wrong answer. That's all that's to it. But a competing approach is one by Dr. Jeffrey Hinton. Now, this is not some conspiracy theory person, someone who lives in an underground basement waiting for the apocalypse to hit. Jeffrey Hinton is actually considered one of the godfathers of AI and deep learning. He had a PhD in AI in 1978, so quite a while ago. In 2013, his company was actually acquired by Google. He won the Turing Award in 2018, which is like the Nobel Prize, Nobel Award for computer science. In May 2023, he resigned from Google because of ethical considerations, concerns about their technology that's being built. And just about a month ago, he won the Nobel Prize for physics. A year ago, he gave this interview to NBC's 60 Minutes. And you know what, I'll just let you hear what he has to say. If that will work. All right, so this is what he has to say about AI and AI capability today.
Does humanity know what it's doing?
No. I think we're moving into a period when, for the first time ever, we may have things more intelligent than us.
You believe they can understand?
Yes.
You believe they are intelligent?
Yes.
You believe these systems have experiences of their own and can make decisions based on those experiences?
In the same sense as people do, yes.
Are they conscious?
I think they probably don't have much self-awareness at present. So in that sense, I don't think they're conscious.
Will they have self-awareness, consciousness?
Oh, yes. I think they will in time.
And so human beings will be the second most intelligent beings on the planet.
Yeah.
All right. Whether or not you're on the Jeffrey Hinton's end of the spectrum or on Google's end of the spectrum, meaning AI hallucination is a byproduct of the technology because of wrong numbers punched into a wrong formula, or you're saying that there's actual intelligence behind that. Let's look at some of the examples of AI hallucinations. Now, I should say most vendors today who come up with new AI models, large language models, invest a lot of effort in minimizing those AI hallucinations, but they still exist. So, in terms of examples, let's see some of those. A while ago, ChatGPT was asked, what's the world record for crossing the English Channel entirely by foot? Some of you might know the problem with that question, but let's look at a map. So we've got England on one end, we've got Europe on the other end, and there's the English Channel, which is a body of water, meaning that's not land, okay? Just in case you're wondering. And the answer was, there is actually a world record for crossing the English Channel by foot. And it was, it's 14 hours and 51 minutes. So if you're able to walk on water, that's how long it will take you. Another example is one where, as children, we might have asked ourselves, what's heavier? Okay, 1 kilo or 1 pound of water or air? Any guesses from the audience which is heavier? All right. By the way, when I give that presentation to the 25-year-olds, they've got a very deterministic answer. So imagine that, which is quite close to the one that ChatGPT gave, that a kilo of water is heavier than a kilo of air. All right, but private individuals are not the only ones who are fooled by AI hallucinations. There was also a case where a lawyer asked ChatGPT to create a legal document that was then submitted to the court. And the judge basically kicked that lawyer out of his courtroom almost immediately because it turns out that the cases that were cited in this document weren't real. There were bogus judicial decisions that were cited there, and internal citations that pointed out to stuff that didn't exist and then pointed back to those internal citations. So that's actually the first time in history where AI uses the who's on first routine, the Abbott and Costello routine, when creating a legal document. By the way, the lawyer said to his defense that that's what the AI told him that was real, and he shouldn't be punished for it. All right. Now we're getting into the fun stuff. When AI hallucinations actually become coding nightmares, when AI hallucinations or AI psychology, either one, puts your organizations in harm's way. So, how many organizations here use open source libraries that are publicly available? All right, quite a few. And, you know, over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of solutions that are aimed at securing the whole process. There are practices in place. But what if some software developer from your own internal R&D divisions or departments was utilizing ChatGPT for a recommendation about a specific code library? Meaning, for example, I want to do this and this. I'm a software engineer. I can either use Google in order to find the library, and then use Google again in order to understand how exactly to tie that library into the code, and how to use it, how not to use it, and so on and so forth. Or I can just submit a question to ChatGPT on the recommendation itself, along with a code snippet that I can just copy paste and put inside my production grade product. So let's see how bad actors are using that. At first, we've got an attacker. That attacker submits a lot of questions to ChatGPT in order to try and come up with code libraries that actually don't exist. Okay? So they're asking again and again and again and again, and after the 10th or 100th attempt, an AI hallucination causes ChatGPT to reply with a recommendation for a code library that doesn't actually exist. Once this is verified by the attacker, what the attacker does is actually write his own malicious library with the same name and upload that malicious library to some open source code repository. Okay? So imagine when you're looking for that recommendation, for that library, based on the recommendation you got from ChatGPT, initially you find nothing. But then, once the attacker uploaded his malicious library to that repository, you're searching for that, and then you're being directed to that specifically malicious library. Being a software developer who has to ship software in really time-boxed days, sometimes even hours, you've got almost no time to validate if that library, validate manually, I mean, if that library is actually malicious or not. You're submitting it through the pipeline, counting on third-party software, security software, to check whether or not that library is secure or not. Some of those solutions rely on specific lists and dictionaries of stuff. So if that's a new library or something that hasn't been actively flagged as malicious, there's almost no way of knowing that as a software development, you have just introduced bad code, malicious code, into your own software, into your own product. Just like, I mean, very similar to what happened in the SolarWinds attack. So now when somebody's looking for a code library that does that, they're actually deploying this malicious code into their own product and shipping it to hundreds, maybe thousands of customers. So we've got this happening all over again, and this time using AI as a sort of Trojan horse. Now, before I give you some recommendations on how exactly to deal with that threat, there was actually something quite new happening about 2 weeks ago, utilizing the same attack surface, meaning LLM, large language models, as a malicious attack surface. So it turns out some anonymous threat actor was combing GitHub and other public repositories for access tokens to Amazon, AWS services. One of the services provided by Amazon, and by the way, that's also something that's provided by Microsoft and by Google, is LLM as a service. Meaning just like you use AWS services for your DevOps needs, where you go ahead and rent computer resources, basically, you can also rent large language models in order to create AI applications inside the organization. So basically what the threat actors were doing was, once they exposed those access tokens, they gained access to the AWS Management Console, those software development companies that had their access token exposed. And then they set up LLMs as a service through their AWS console, meaning they used the companies, those organizations that were targeted. They used their own resources in order to set up LLMs, and then used those LLMs to set up chatbots that provided answers for stuff like child pornography and violence and firearms and other stuff that are considered illegal. So the damage was twofold. First of all, AWS resources were used without the organizations actually knowing about it. And two, they had legal liability because their own resources were used for stuff like child pornography. There's a paper about it from the last 2 weeks. That's just another attack vector where bad actors are utilizing AI in order to cause harm to organizations. All right, a few quick recommendations. What can you do today to protect your organizations from those types of attacks I've just shown? A, verification. Well, whenever you see a public library available somewhere, try to gather as much information as you can about it before deploying it into your code. Another thing is community consultation. Go ahead, reach out to Redditors, use Stack Overflow, ask people if they know this library, and can anyone say if it's legit or not. When you do it, don't forget to wear a hard hat because the community doesn't always like people asking stupid questions, just like we saw earlier. Try to look up official documentation and cross-reference whether or not this library has been used or if it's something that's pretty recent, and if there are any examples of it being used without any repercussions, any bad repercussions. Experiment. If you've got the time, set up a test environment and see whether or not this code actually does what it's intended to do. In a lot of cases, malicious libraries don't do anything except the bad stuff that the threat actor baked into it. So even if that's a library that's supposed to provide you with some UI elements or whatever, you run it, you see that nothing happens. That should raise a red flag. And be aware of updates. Sometimes, as we've seen in the SolarWinds attack, the malicious code has to do with specific versions. Once you update, you might be able to plug in a hole, a security hole, that existed in your code for a long time. Now, one last thing before I'm happy to answer questions. As Mickey mentioned, and I'm sure a lot of the people here heard, people are saying that ChatGPT will replace software developers. That's not going to happen. It's going to allow organizations to ship software quicker, hopefully better. Not yet in a more secure fashion, but the industry is working on it. Yes, it's a wondrous new technology. Yes, it has new emerging attack vectors. And yes, those have devastating potential, just like we saw in the SolarWinds attack. But regulation is already underway. This is from October last year. That's an executive order on how to utilize AI in a trustworthy way. That's already in effect. And again, with the right precautions and practices, it could be something that's being utilized for good. Just don't trust cyborgs. Thanks. Any questions from the crowd? From the audience?
I'll start. So one of the recommendations you didn't mention was doing a source code inspection of the libraries that you are using or attempting to use. And I've also found that Copilot and Claude both do pretty good jobs of evaluating source code and telling you what it does. Have you looked at using that approach as a way of validating the libraries that you're looking to use?
Yeah, but using just one of those tools is not enough. I don't know what's the investment in most organizations for AI today. Some organizations handle the whole AI thing as an application security thing, which is fine. Other organizations don't even address it today as something that needs to be secured. But basically, if you utilize the same practices, tried and true practices that we know are effective, okay, of a number of tools with approaching it from different angles, not just inline code scanning, not just SAST and DAST tools, but a number of tools and practices, then you'll be able to cover it 90% of the cases.
Thanks. Other questions?
All right. Thank you so much.
We've got one. Yossi.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Sure. I just wanted to follow on his question too. If you've used libraries like GitHub, I'm just curious, do you have recommendations for how to monitor changes? Because anybody can use a valid, secure library, and then it can get updated by somebody pushing something up there that could be malicious, or like what happened with SolarGate, for example.
Yeah, so one recommendation is, and that doesn't necessarily cover everything, but if the changes made are not too big, then those could actually, the diff, looking at the differentiation between the previous version and the new version, could be done either manually or through the use of LLMs. Actually, they're pretty good at it, okay? So it's like using fire to fight fire, but that's actually pretty good, because the speed at which those engines, those tools can provide you with the insights, not necessarily saying, is there anything malicious inside, but can you crunch down the differentiation between the different versions? That's one of the most efficient prompts you can provide to an LLM. And by the way, it also works for reverse engineering a whole bunch of stuff. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was also curious about like specific kind of monitoring to be aware. Sorry, I was also curious about, do you have recommendations, or are you familiar with tools that alert you to those changes before you pull? Because if you're just using a library and then you pull an update, there might be some differences that could be malicious. When do you check that? When do you check GitHub before you do the pull, or do you have an alerting tool or a third-party process that you would use? Or
so I'd say
it's a wide open kind of question. I'm just curious, like recommendation-wise, generally.
So I can't recommend on specific tools, but if you take a look at the entire pipeline, basically, okay. So when you introduce new libraries, yeah, that's one point where you need to look at it. When you package the whole thing, that's another point. So you have to have different gates within the process of packaging and shipping your software. Now, in terms of actual tools that do it, most vendors today, we're like a year and a half after ChatGPT came in as a system, and software supply chain attacks have been going on for more than a decade, and the 2020 attack, the SolarWinds attack, brought it to a lot of people's awareness, basically. So vendors started introducing known software vendors that create tools for SAST and DAST. Almost all of them have capability of saying whether or not an update contains something that's off, let's say. Some will tell you if there are any specific vulnerabilities. Others will say if there's actual malicious code inside. Others will even say if the update that's been introduced puts your system at harm if you integrate it in a certain way. So today, most application security vendors cover that area.